When you hear the name Wilt Chamberlain, there's really one number that just jumps right out, doesn't it? 100.
Mm.
100. It's this, like, almost mythical figure in sports history. But was that night just about an insane box score? Or is there maybe a much deeper story going on there?
That number, 100, from March 2nd, 1962,
Mm-hmm.
it's absolutely iconic. But you're right, the story goes way, way beyond just the final score. This deep dive, we're going back to that specific game, Philadelphia Warriors, New York Knicks, but also into the whole context surrounding it. And that reveals so much more.
Exactly. We're really trying to peel back the layers here, not
Yeah.
just recount the points, but understand the full picture. What did that night really mean?
And our sources for this, they're pretty extensive. We're drawing from hundreds of interviews trying to get past just the stat sheet.
Right. So our mission really is to understand not just how Wilt managed to score 100 points, but what that performance, what that night signified for him personally, for the NBA, which was still kind of finding its feet, and honestly for America at a really pivotal moment in its history. Let's unpack this.
Okay, so to really get the significance, you first have to picture the NBA back in 1962. It was a very different league.
Yeah. How so?
Well, the research often describes it as being in its, quote, bumbling adolescence.
Hmm.
It was often seen as, the kid brother to the college game.
Less prestigious.
Way less.
Yeah.
Crowds were small, sometimes really sparse. And the game itself was rough. Played by veterans, some guys who would literally, take out their false teeth before the game started.
Wow. You wouldn't see that today.
No. And you hear about players smoking at halftime, washing their own uniforms in hotel sinks. It felt really raw, definitely run on a shoestring budget compared to now.
Mhm.
The league was just fighting for credibility.
So they needed something to make it more exciting, more watchable.
They really did. And a huge problem was the pace. It could be painfully slow. Teams would just stall.
Stall. Like, just hold the ball.
Yeah, shamelessly. There's this one infamous game the research mentions, 19-18, Fort Wayne Pistons and the Minneapolis Lakers. Teams just held the ball to run down the clock.
19-18, that sounds dreadful.
Oh, the fans hated it. They were booing, throwing things. It was purely about protecting a lead, but it was killing the game. And that kind of thing really forced some crucial rule changes that arguably saved the league.
Okay, like the shot clock, the 24-second clock. Feels fundamental now.
Absolutely revolutionary back then. The credit usually goes to Danny Biasone, the owner of the Syracuse Nationals.
And it came from math, right?
Basically, yeah.
Mm.
Simple observation. About 120 shots were taken in a typical 48-minute game. Divide that out, you get roughly one shot every 24 seconds. So they put it in the clock in 54, forced teams to actually shoot. There was resistance, but it worked. No more stalling.
And they also widened the lane around the same time to push the big men out a bit.
Exactly. Another move aimed at opening things up, increasing the flow. So you have this league actively trying to change, trying to get more dynamic.
Yeah.
And that's the backjet for this game.
The game itself wasn't in Philly or New York.
No, that's another layer. It was in Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Chocolate Town.
Chocolate Town, USA. I mean, a really unique setting. A town completely dominated by Milton Hershey's legacy. The smell of chocolate in the air, streets named Chocolate Avenue, Cocoa Avenue.
Sounds almost like a company town.
It basically was.
Yeah.
The research paints Hershey as this sort of benevolent dictator. He built the town for his workers, but had his own very strict code of conduct.
Right.
There's a story about him firing a supervisor because a salesman merely touched a woman's arm at a counter.
Wow. Okay, so a specific kind of place.
Yeah.
And the arena.
Hershey Arena, built in 36, had this distinctive arched roof. And crucially, for this night, they laid down this temporary hardwood floor directly over the ice rink underneath.
Over the ice. Must have been cold.
Probably. And it wasn't even a full house, maybe half filled, a minor league town feel. And here's a key thing adding to the legend. No known video recording exists of the game.
Which definitely helps build that mythical quality, doesn't it? What about the game itself? Any specific context?
Yeah, it was late in the season. These two teams, the Warriors and the Knicks, had already played each other 10 times. This was the 11th meeting.
They must have been tired of each other.
And just plain tired. It was the Warriors' 90th game of the season, Knicks' 87th. Muscles aching, knees, backs. Fatigue was real. Warriors were favored, though, by 11 points.
And there was even, an NFL exhibition game beforehand?
Yeah, Eagles versus Colts played right before the Warriors-Knicks game. Just adds to that slightly surreal kind of small-town fair atmosphere the whole night. Sets the stage for something unexpected.
Okay, so let's get into the main players. Obviously starting with Wilt Chamberlain, the Dipper.
Right. You had the physique, obviously.
Yeah.
Unbelievable athlete. But the research really emphasizes he also had the perfect ego for this kind of domination.
What do you mean by ego?
Well, to go for 100, it wasn't just that he wanted it. It suggests he needed it, needed to bend the sport to his will, to hit a number that seemed impossible, just to prove only he could do it. 100 had this, like, magical quality.
And he was this transformative figure, right? Coming into a largely white league and just taking the game vertical, playing above the rim in a way people hadn't seen.
Absolutely. And traditionalists, they didn't always like it. The research suggests some saw him as disrupting the way the game was supposed to be played.
He was averaging 50 points a game that season, which is just staggering.
A 50.4 to be exact. So the idea of him hitting 100, it was already kind of bubbling up. A whisper, a prophecy almost. He'd apparently sort of coyly admit, yeah, maybe it's possible if things broke just right.
And this need to prove himself, it seems like it came out in other ways, too. The research mentions some odd stories.
Oh, yeah. There are anecdotes about him, cheating at cards just to win, showing off mundane skills like how perfectly he could hang his pants, and that completely wild story about him claiming he killed a mountain lion with his bare hands.
Wait, really? A mountain lion?
That's the story he told. Apparently showed scars as proof. Whether true or not, it points to this deep-seated drive to be seen as the ultimate, the conqueror in everything.
Interesting. And his signature shot wasn't even a dunk, right? It was that fall-away jumper.
Yeah, from like 10, 15 feet out, often banking it in. His teammate Paul Arizin thought Wilt did that, partly because he didn't want to be known only for being tall. Another teammate, Tom Hawkins, called it the fee-fi foam syndrome, the giant wanting to show he had finesse too.
Despite his dominance, the sources say he wasn't naturally confrontational.
Not initially, but he took a beating physically. Apparently the rough stuff lessened quite a bit once he started responding, pushing back.
And his style of play, controlling the pace after rebounds, waiting for guards, that wasn't always popular.
No. Red Auerbach, the Celtics coach, famously criticized that, saw it as Wilt not being a team player. But his own coach, Frank McGuire, had a different approach. He basically told Wilt, just be the dipper. Gave him the freedom to play his way.
McGuire also suggested he shoot free throws underhanded.
He did. And, maybe surprisingly, that season Wilt shot 61% from the line, his career best. Still not great, obviously, but better. It was always seen as his least athletic move, though. Looked awkward.
What about his relationships with teammates? Sounds like it was mixed.
Yeah, complex. Joe Rucklick, a backup center, he observed what he felt was a freeze out from some white veterans. Said they barely talked to Wilt, even in huddles.
But then you have stories of him looking out for guys.
Definitely. Like with Al Attles, who's a rookie. Wilt actively looked out for him. They had this packed Dutchit where they'd split costs if they had to eat separately because the place was segregated. Wilt wouldn't go into places Attles couldn't.
That's significant.
It is. But then there's also an awkward story about Wilt teasing another teammate, Tom Meschery, about going on a double date, and Meschery felt mocked and backed out. So you see different sides.
And his off-court life was legendary, or notorious, depending on how you look at it.
Right. The famous and hugely controversial claim of 20,000 sexual encounters. That actually emerged from a question in a book interview.
How does that number even come about?
Well, his close friend Linda Huey apparently thought the interviewer was trying to trap him. She reportedly suggested maybe 2,000 was more realistic, jokingly saying, what's a zero between friends? But Wilt went with the bigger number. He was known to carry this pouch full of women's phone numbers. People described him as capable of being incredibly charming, but also sometimes quite cutting or mean. Huey also shared a moment where Wilt apparently wished he could just have consistency, go home to the same person. Adds a layer of complexity.
His connection to Harlem seems important, too.
Very. He was part owner of Small's Paradise, a legendary nightclub there. He felt almost like he owned Harlem, or at least a big part of New York. He really gravitated towards that vibrant black cultural world, but it was a place where whites came to his world on his terms.
Okay, let's bring in some of those key teammates who were part of this. Tom Gola.
Gola, yeah, solid Philly guy. He remembered seeing Wilt at camp in '59 after some time away and just being stunned, thinking, he's huge. He had that classic joke about the Warriors offense. Our play was give the ball to Wilt and stand there.
Ah, sounds simple enough.
On the night of the 100-point game, Gola actually only saw the first quarter live. He had something else to do back in Philly, so he listened to the rest of the game on the radio. He was known as a pretty straight shooter, too. Voted honestly on all-star ballots, even if it wasn't the popular team choice.
And Al Attles, the rookie Wilt looked out for.
Right. Adles wasn't even expecting to make the NBA, apparently had a teaching job lined up just in case. Total team player, no ego. Always looked for the open man, or in this case, the hot hand Wilt. He took genuine pride in his role that night, just focused on getting Wilt the ball. Years later, as a coach himself, he talked to young players about that tension between individual achievement and team goals.
Tom Meschery, the Mad Russian. Sounds like quite a character.
Oh, yeah. Intellectual background, literary family, spoke multiple languages, related to Tolstoy, believe it or not.
Tolstoy.
But on the court, he was fiery, known for getting into it physically, especially with guys like Tom Heinsohn of the Celtics. We mentioned that awkward double-date teasing from Wilt Meschery felt there was a metallic edge to it, felt mocked, and it bothered him. He saw Coach McGuire's strategy of just letting Wilt dominate as a kind of clever guile. But by the fourth quarter of the 100-point game, Meschery admitted he just kind of gave in to the chase, felt the team concept dissolve. He basically became a spectator, focused on feeding Wilt.
And Joe Rucklick, the backup center.
Rucklick, yeah. Rarely played, kind of an observer. Wilt still called him Rookie. He was the one who really noticed the quietness, the lack of interaction between Wilt and some white teammates. He saw Wilt trying to fit into cramped train seats and thought, you know, this guy's too big for the small-time NBA.
And he tried to talk literature with Wilt.
Huh, yeah. He tried bringing up James Joyce's Ulysses, and Wilt apparently thought he meant the Kirk Douglas movie Ulysses. A bit of a disconnect there. And crucially, after the game ended, Rucklick is the one who picked up a ball off the floor for Wilt. That becomes a whole saga later.
We'll get to that. What about Paul Arizin, Pitch and Paul?
Arizin, the veteran scorer, a Marine. He was one of the guys who believed Wilt used that fall-away jumper partly to prove he wasn't just tall. During the fourth quarter, Arizin was on the bench watching it all unfold. His take was clear. Wilt earned every single point, despite how weird the game got. He was even apparently heckling Richie Guerin from the Knicks bench. Arizin said later he always knew Wilt would get 100 someday.
Okay, let's flip to the Knicks, the opponents that night. Starting with the guy guarding Wilt, Darrell Imhoff.
Poor Darrell Imhoff. Young guy, only his second season, and he wasn't even supposed to start.
Oh, why not?
The Knicks' usual starting center, Phil Jordan, was out sick. Flu, apparently. So Imhoff gets thrown into the fire. His coach, Eddie Donovan, basically told him, look, you're all I've got. Just try not to foul out.
That's not exactly a confidence-boosting goal.
No kidding. A humble goal for facing Wilt Chamberlain. Imhoff wasn't seen as a natural, just a tall body. And eventually he did foul out in the fourth quarter, trying to guard Wilt.
He kind of got stuck with that label, didn't he? The guy Wilt scored 100 on.
He did. But the research shows he handled it with amazing grace and humor over the years. He'd joke about getting a rash every March 1st, or say he spent 12 years in Wilt's armpits, or claim Wilt only got 85 off me. He seemed to understand he's just part of this bizarre historical moment, part of the league's transition.
Then there was Richie Guerin, the Knicks star guard, the leatherneck.
Yeah, Guerin was an all-star, totally different style, very aggressive, attacking. He embodied that older, rougher 50s spirit known for fighting, tantrums, throwing elbows. There's a note about him just destroying Bob Cousy in the low post once.
So he wasn't intimidated.
Not at all. And during this game, as Wilt kept scoring and the crowd got into it, chanting, "Give it to Wilt," Guerin reportedly got visibly furious, red-faced mad, annoyed by the Warriors' bench antics too. He even got into it with some hecklers in the crowd.
And that feeling stuck with him.
It seems so. Decades later, the research indicates he was still pretty steamed about how that second half played out. He felt the way the Warriors force-fed Wilt and the Knicks fouling back. It wasn't entirely earned in a normal competitive sense. He remained quite adamant about that.
Interesting contrast with Willie Naulls, the Knicks captain.
Very different personality. Naulls was a smooth scorer, much quieter than Guerin. His backstory is really powerful. Growing up under segregation, his mother instilled this deep belief in him. Nobody is better than you. That sustained him.
He faced challenges early in his career.
Oh, yes. He nearly quit the St. Louis Hawks over being denied service at a segregated diner. And it's noted the Hawks were the last all-white team to win an NBA championship, which tells you something about the league then.
But he found a different experience in New York.
He really did. He found a sense of community and peace in Harlem, connecting with prominent black figures in arts and culture, like Sidney Poitier, Duke Ellington. He was genuinely grateful for the trade to the Knicks. The New York press didn't always get him, though gave him this odd nickname, Black Whale. He consciously tried not to let the anger and racism he encountered consume him.
And his view of the 100-point game was different from Guerin's.
Completely different. Naulls saw it as absolutely authentic. He didn't see it as illegitimate. And later in life, after becoming a minister, he framed it in this really profound way. He saw Wilt's performance in the context of the racial climate and the unspoken quotas limiting black players as ringing the bell of freedom.
The bell of freedom. Wow.
Yeah, he felt those quotas were strangling the league's potential, and Wilt breaking through like that was a statement against those limits. A really powerful perspective, connecting the game directly to the struggle for racial equality.
That really adds another dimension, doesn't it? Okay, let's walk through the game itself. How did this chase actually unfold on the court?
Well, the Warriors started strong. Wilt came out firing in the first quarter, put up 23 points right away.
23 in the first quarter.
Yeah. And the research suggests at that point he was maybe thinking more about breaking the free throw record for a game, not necessarily going for 100.
But as he kept scoring, the Knicks had to react somehow.
They did. They started throwing double teams, even triple teams at him. They were physical, banging and pulling on him, trying to deny him the ball, especially above the free throw line, trying to keep him from getting deep position.
But he still got his points. Where was he most effective?
He was great at establishing position down low on the left block. He called it his home. He'd get there just a foot or two from the basket, and it was tough to stop him.
Then things got really weird in the fourth quarter with all the fouling.
Totally bizarre. The Knicks basically adopted this strategy. Forget trying to stop Wilt direct. Let's stop the ball before it gets to him.
How?
They started intentionally fouling the Warriors' guards, Guy Rogers, Donnie Butcher, as soon as they crossed half court, way away from the basket. The thinking was, make the guards shoot free throws, maybe they'll miss some, and it keeps the ball out of Wilt's hands near the 100-point mark.
Which must have slowed the game down to a crawl.
Absolutely. Foul after foul. Meanwhile, you can imagine Wilt feeling the pressure, the possibility.
Did he show it?
The research says he did. He sensed the moment. There's mention of him dropping an easy pass, showing some nerves. But as the clock ticked down and he got closer, he also became more relentless, more aggressive, really leaning into defenders, demanding the ball.
And his teammates were all in on getting him the ball by then.
Oh, yeah. Completely focused on it. Addles, Rogers, Muscari, Ted Larice, their sole mission was feed the dipper.
Mestre said he felt like a spectator.
He did. He felt the whole team concept just kind of evaporated in that fourth quarter. It became the Wilt show. Larice, who was a good shooter himself, knew he wasn't going to take another shot that night. Even Horizon, watching from the bench, acknowledged that while the game got strange, Wilt earned those points through sheer force and persistence.
And then, the moment, he hits 100.
Yeah, the radio call from Bill Campbell captures it, the final seconds ticking down.
Yeah.
Rucklick gets the ball into Wilt near the basket, and he spins, goes up, dunks it. And it's just pandemonium.
Fans rush the court.
Instantly. Total chaos.
Yeah.
Just swarmed him. And the descriptions of Wilt in that moment, utterly drained, head down, looking like a laborer who just finished an incredibly grueling shift.
There's a comparison to Babe Ruth.
Yeah, the source material compares the scene to kids mobbing Babe Ruth after his 500th home run. Just this overwhelming tide of people wanting to touch the hero. And in that chaos, Wilt supposedly pointed to the ball near the hoop and yelled to Rucklick, "Get the ball!"
And Rucklick grabbed a ball.
He grabbed a ball from the court, yes, which leads us right into
The Great Ball Controversy. One of the weirdest parts of the whole legend.
oh, it's a classic piece of sports folklore. Just total confusion and conflicting stories about the actual basketball used for the 100th point.
So Rucklick claimed he got it for Wilt.
Rucklick always maintained he picked up a ball in the locker room for Wilt, the one Wilt pointed at. But then there was this kid, Kerry Ryman, who was 14 at the time. He swore he snatched the real ball off the court during the chaos, ran out with it, and decades later tried to sell it for big money.
And there was another claim.
Yes, Harvey Pollack, the Warriors' longtime statistician and PR guy, he insisted the official team ball, which the announcer Dave Zenkoff later painted 100 on for the famous photo, was the genuine article. So you had multiple claims, arguments, lawsuits, even lie detector tests involved later on. It just adds to that mystique, the fact that even the central artifact is disputed.
And the fact that hardly any major media was there didn't help clear things up.
That's a huge piece of context. No New York beat writers were there. Think about that Knicks playing, potential history being made, and the major New York papers didn't send anyone.
Why not?
Leonard Coppett, who covered the Knicks for the Post, was down in Florida covering baseball spring training. That was seen as the more prestigious assignment. The NBA just wasn't considered as big a deal nationally. Covering the Yankees, he said, was a quantum leap up.
Mm.
So the game got covered by local Philly papers, sure, but the lack of national press definitely contributed to it feeling, as the research puts it, famously obscure at first.
We also need to circle back to the racial climate, which Willie Naulls spoke so powerfully about.
Yes, the sources really emphasize this. You can't understand the era without acknowledging the reality of segregation players dealing with it on the road, segregated hotels, restaurants. Wilt was this dominant black athlete entering a league still grappling with integration.
And his approach to civil rights was maybe different from other prominent black athletes at the time.
It seems so. The research contrasts Wilt's relatively lower public profile on civil rights issues compared to someone like Bill Russell, with his more private actions, like the story about him insisting on hiring black contractors for an apartment complex he was building in Philadelphia. It was complex.
And there were disagreements even among players about the extent of prejudice in the league.
Right. There's a noted exchange where Bob Cousy, a white superstar, apparently said he didn't see much evidence of racial bias. Wilt strongly disagreed, basically saying, of course you didn't. You didn't experience what we experienced.
And Naulls' perspective frames the 100-point game itself as a statement against that backdrop.
Absolutely. Seeing it not just as an athletic feat, but as Wilt symbolically ringing the bell of freedom, challenging those unwritten rules and quotas that he felt were holding back black players and, by extension, the league itself. It reframes the achievement from just individual dominance to something with real social resonance.
It definitely makes you think about it differently. And Wilt's legacy, it's complicated beyond just the points, isn't it?
Oh, very. His off-court life, especially that 20,000 women claim, became this huge controversial part of his public image. It's almost inseparable from his name now.
There's that weird detail about the writers for The Simpsons buying his house.
Yeah, kind of a fascinating postscript. They bought his unique LA house after he died. One writer apparently saw Wilt as this almost mythical figure, a patron saint who beat the system. But another writer, living in Wilt's space, said he actually grew to genuinely love the man through that connection. Shows the complexity of how he was viewed.
And the 100-point game itself, while unique in the NBA, wasn't entirely without precedent in basketball history.
Right. The research points out there were other guys scoring 100 points around that era, but in different contexts like Bevo Francis and Frank Selvey in college games, often against much weaker competition or under different rules. It just highlights that context really matters. The NBA stage, even in '62, was different.
Decades later, how did the key figures remember it? Did perspectives change?
Not entirely. Richie Guerin, and apparently Eddie Donovan's widow too, still held on to that feeling of annoyance about how the game played out, felt it wasn't quite legitimate. But you had Naulls seeing the authenticity and the racial statement. You had Imhoff handling his unwilling role with good humor. And Al Attles stayed focused on the team aspect they set out to get Wilt to 100, and they did it. Different people took different things away from it.
It feels like this game happened right at a turning point for the NBA.
It really did. The league was changing, saved by those rule changes like the shot clock. It was integrating, bringing in this new wave of talent. The fact that the Knicks team changed significantly after that season, Imhoff and Naulls were eventually traded, sort of reflects that broader transition happening across the league.
The research, like Gary Pomerantz's book that dove deep into this, seems crucial for understanding all these threads.
Absolutely. It weaves together the basketball action, Wilt's complicated biography, the state of the league, the social history. All these layers are needed to really appreciate what happened that night and what it meant.
So, looking back on this deep dive, we've gone from the NBA's bumbling adolescence and the unique setting of Hershey, Pennsylvania.
Right, into the lives of these players. Wilt's singular drive, the different roles of his teammates, the Knicks caught in the storm.
Through the sheer weirdness of how the game unfolded, that intentional fouling, the final chaotic moments.
The mystery of the ball itself, which kind of symbolizes how contested the memory of the event is.
And critically, layering in that complex social and racial context of 1962 America.
Yeah, it becomes a story about more than just points. It's about chasing something impossible, about team dynamics under pressure, about how history gets remembered and argued over.
And maybe most profoundly, how a single night in sports can be so tangled up with the biggest societal issues of its time.
Which brings us back to Willie Naulls' perspective. Thinking about him calling that game Wilt's Bell of Freedom against the racial quotas he felt were strangling the league. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? What does that incredible individual achievement tell us about the sheer amount of potential, the talent that might have been held back in that era? And what happens when those kinds of systemic barriers finally start to fall?
Think about that.